Welcome to this peaceful moment. Here, you will discover stories inspired by the quiet beauty of Japan. Each tale is like a soft breeze through a bamboo grove, carrying you away from the worries of the day. Imagine the scent of blooming cherry blossoms and the gentle flow of a nearby clear stream. Let these words and sounds cradle your mind in calm and serenity. Tonight, permit yourself to drift into a restful sleep. Let us begin this journey together. The moon rests on the pond. The pond had always been there, tucked away behind the ancient temple on the outskirts of the mountain village. Few travelers ever stumbled upon it, hidden as it was by willows and reeds, its surface quiet and dark, a mirror to the sky. Yet to the villagers, it was more than water. It was memory, reflection, and silence. They said the pond held time itself, that its surface remembered all who had gazed upon it. Every evening, when the wind stilled and the frogs grew silent, the moon lowered itself gently into the pond, as though seeking a place to sleep. Its reflection rippled faintly with the night breeze. And the villagers whispered that the moon came to rest here because it trusted the pond to keep its secrets safe. Return. Kato had not been to the village in over a decade. He had left when he was young, eager to exchange the slowness of mountain life for the rush and promise of the city. Yet the city had not been kind. It had swallowed him in noise, days blurred by deadlines, nights dissolved into electric haze. Success came, but it was fragile, always measured against others. And one day, when his father's final letter arrived, already written with a trembling hand, Kato realized he had been gone too long. Now he stood again before the temple gates, suitcase in hand, air sharp with pine and the scent of earth after rain. The cicadas hummed their summer chorus. The stones of the old path pressed firm beneath his feet. He had forgotten how narrow the road was, how the moss grew in the cracks, how the air itself seemed to breathe with him. When he greeted the monks, they nodded with the same patient calm his father had always admired. One of them, an old man with a beard as thin as silk, looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You have your father's eyes." He, too, would stand by the pond when the moon rose. Perhaps you will see what he saw. Kato bowed, unsure of how to respond. He had come seeking closure, perhaps forgiveness from whom, he wasn't certain. But the mention of his father and the pond tugged at a memory buried deep, one he had not touched in years. The pond. That night, he followed the narrow trail behind the temple. Lanterns lit the path in dim pools of gold, their glow swallowed quickly by the surrounding trees. He remembered walking here as a child, his father's hand steady around his own, fireflies floating like sparks of the unseen. The pond revealed itself slowly. First, the reeds, swaying gently as though bowing to him. Then the hush of water unseen but near. And finally, the open clearing where the pond lay waiting, its surface still as glass. The moon had already risen, pale and round, and there it was resting on the water. Kato stood at the edge and felt as though he were intruding upon a sacred ritual. The reflection of the moon was so clear it seemed tangible, as if he could lean forward and scoop it into his hands. Yet when the breeze stirred, the reflection quivered, reminding him of its fragile illusion. He whispered to the water, though he did not know why. "Father." The silence that followed was not empty but full, as if the pond itself was listening. Crickets began their quiet song, blending with the soft rustle of willow branches. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt the city loosen its grip upon him. Memories. Each night after, Kato returned to the pond. It became his companion, a mirror not just of the moon but of himself. He would sit for hours, recalling fragments of childhood. His father's voice teaches him patience. The pond only shows the moon when it is still. So too must you be still, if you wish to see clearly. As a boy, he had been restless, throwing stones to watch the ripples scatter the reflection. His father never scolded, only smiled gently. "Do you see? When you disturb the water, the moon cannot rest. The same is true of your heart." Now, years later, the lesson came back with quiet force. His own heart, unsettled by ambition and regret, had never given the moon a place to rest. But here, by the pond, the waters within him began to calm. The villagers noticed his visits. Some would nod knowingly, others would smile. One elderly woman approached him one evening with a lantern. "Your father used to sit in that very spot," she said softly. "He said the pond listened better than people did. Perhaps that is why he came here when words failed him." Kato bowed in gratitude, though her words left him with a bittersweet ache. The girl by the water. One evening, as the moon climbed higher, Kato saw he was not alone. Across the pond, beneath a willow tree, a young woman knelt by the water, her hands folded in her lap. She seemed unaware of his presence, her gaze fixed upon the moon's reflection. For a moment, he considered leaving, not wishing to disturb her solitude. But then she looked up and their eyes met across the mirrored water. She smiled faintly, as though she had expected him all along. They met often after that, though sometimes without words. Her name was Aiko, a villager who had never left, who knew the pond as intimately as he remembered his father's voice. She told him that her grandmother once said the pond had a soul, that it kept the prayers of those who sat beside it. "Do you believe that?" Kato asked. She shrugged lightly. "When I come here with a troubled heart, the pond does not speak, yet I leave lighter. Perhaps it is because the moon takes some of my burden when it rests." Her words lingered with him. He wondered if his father's final visits to the pond had been prayers left behind, waiting for him to hear. Lessons of stillness. The weeks turned into months. Kato worked alongside the monks during the day, tending the gardens, sweeping the temple steps, and carrying water from the stream. The labor was simple, but it grounded him. At night, he walked with Aiko to the pond. They would sit in silence, sometimes speaking of small things, sometimes not speaking at all. Slowly, he came to realize that the pond was teaching him. Not with words, but with presence. Its surface reflected whatever was before it, unchanged, impartial. If the sky were clear, it held the moon. If clouds covered the heavens, they held only shadows. Yet in both, the pond remained itself. So too, he thought, must he learn to live not by resisting change, but by allowing it to pass across him, without losing his stillness. One evening, Aiko asked him, "Will you stay here, Kato? Or will the city call you back?" He hesitated, the question stirring both fear and longing. "I don't know," he admitted. "But here, for the first time in years, I can breathe." She nodded, as if she understood more than he said. The final echo. Autumn arrived. The trees around the pond blazed crimson and gold, their leaves drifting to the water's surface, where they floated beside the moon. The nights grew colder, the air crisper. One evening, as Kato sat by the pond alone, he felt a presence beside him. He turned, but no one was there. And yet, he heard his father's voice note in words, but in the stillness, in the echo of memory. He felt it in the way the pond held the moon, in the way the night accepted silence. His father had come here seeking peace, and in a way, he had left that peace behind for his son to find. Kato bowed deeply to the pond. Tears filled his eyes, not of sorrow but of release. The moon shone brighter that night, as if acknowledging his prayer. A new beginning. The village became his home again. He no longer longed for the city's pace. He found rhythm in the turning of seasons, in the sound of the temple bell, in the soft company of Aiko. He began helping the monks teach the village children, sharing the lessons of the pond: patience, stillness, the quiet strength of reflection. And always, the moon rested on the pond, night after night. Sometimes full, sometimes a sliver, hidden altogether. But it always returned, trusting the pond to hold it. Kato came to see that his own life was like the moon, waning and waxing, vanishing and returning. And the pond, the soul within him, must remain still enough to hold it. Epilogue. Years later, when he had grown older, Kato would still walk to the pond each evening. His hair silvered, his steps slower, but his heart remained calm. And when he sat by the water with Aiko's hand in his, he would watch the moon descend once more upon the surface. The pond never changed, though the world around it did. It continued to listen, to remember, to hold. And the moon continued to rest, as if in eternal trust. Kato would smile softly, whispering as his father once had, "Rest well, moon. Rest well." And in the silence that followed, the pond would answer not with words, but with stillness, a stillness deep enough to carry a life. Waves lapping the stone shore. Prologue. The sound of water. The sea was never silent. It did not roar or rage as in storms, nor did it sing as in fishermen's songs, but rather it carried an endless murmur, like a voice too ancient for language. At the small coastal village, where cliffs rose behind rows of weather-worn houses, the waves lapped gently against the stone shore. Day after day, they came and went, as though writing and erasing messages on a slate no hand could hold still. Children grew up to that sound. Lovers walked in its rhythm. Elders leaned on their canes, listening to the waves speak to their last evenings. It was the heartbeat of the village, one that never faltered, never changed yet always shifted in tone, in depth, in feeling. And for Aiko, it was the voice of memory. Return. Aiko had not set foot in her birthplace for almost 20 years. Tokyo had swallowed her youth offices filled with the clatter of keyboards. Trains that ran like veins beneath the city, nights lit brighter than the day she remembered as a child. She had gone seeking possibility, as so many did. But the price had been silence, the kind of silence that comes not from stillness, but from forgetting where one's heart had once rested. The telegram of her mother's passing had struck her harder than expected. It was not grief alone, but the sudden realization that she had stayed away too long. And so, on a misty spring morning, she arrived back at the village station with a single suitcase and a heart uncertain of its place. Walking down the familiar path toward the shore, she heard it before she saw it lap, lap, lap. The tide greets the stones, retreating and returning. That sound, unchanged, was like the breath of her childhood. For a moment, she stood still, eyes closed, listening, until her chest trembled with memories. The stone shore stretched out as it always had, lined with dark rocks smoothed by centuries. The houses looked smaller now, roofs sagging, paint fading, yet the same scent of salt, the same gulls crying above, the same eternal sea awaited her. And then she whispered, almost afraid of her voice, "Same home." The empty house. Her family home stood near the cliff's edge, overlooking the water. Once bright with life, her father mending nets on the porch, her mother preparing pickles in jars by the window. It now stood hollow, filled with dust and echoes. Tatami mats bore faint stains, sliding doors creaked reluctantly, and silence pooled in every room. In her mother's room, she found a small wooden box. Inside lay folded letters, pressed flowers, and a seashell necklace Aiko had given as a child. On top of it all rested a note in delicate handwriting. "When the waves speak, listen. They carry what words cannot hold." Her throat tightened. She pressed the necklace to her chest and felt, for the first time in years, tears she had denied herself. The fisherman. On her third day, while walking along the shore, she saw him. A man stood by the rocks, mending nets just as her father once had. His hair was flecked with gray, his skin darkened by years beneath the sun, but his posture was strong, deliberate. When he looked up, his eyes widened. "Aiko?" he asked, disbelief in his voice. She blinked, then recognized him. Daichi? They had been childhood friends, neighbors, classmates, wanderers along these same stones. Where she had left, he had stayed. And now, after decades, time brought them face to face again, with the sea as their witness. They spoke awkwardly at first. She explained her life in the city, her work, and her absence. He nodded, listening with quiet patience. He spoke of the village, how fishing had declined, how many young had left, how only the sea remained unchanged. And yet, he said, gazing at the horizon, the waves still keep us company. They are the one thing that never abandons us. She followed his eyes. The sea shimmered silver in the fading sun, endless, untamed, yet gentle against the stones. She thought of her mother's note. Perhaps the waves carried not only sound, but memory of laughter, of sorrow, of everything too fragile for words. Nights by the shore. Aiko began to walk the shore each evening. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Daichi. They spoke of the past, but more often they fell into silence, letting the rhythm of the waves speak instead. "Do you remember," Daichi said once, "how we used to throw stones and see who could make the most skips?" She laughed softly. "You always won. I threw too hard. You always wanted to win with strength. But here, it's balance that matters." He demonstrated, flicking a flat stone across the surface. It bounced 3, 4, 5 times before sinking. The sound of each skip echoed against the water like laughter long forgotten. One night, the full moon rose over the sea, painting the waves in silver. They sat side by side, the breeze cool, the air filled with salt. Aiko felt something stir within her, something both old and new. She thought of how the city had given her ambition but stolen her peace. Here, among the stones and waves, she found a kind of peace that ambition could never grant. She whispered, "Why does the sea feel so alive?" Daichi replied, "Because it remembers everything. Every ship, every storm, every voice that cried out to it. And it answers, in waves that never cease." Echoes of the past. As weeks turned to months, Aiko sorted through her mother's belongings. She found diaries filled with simple notes: the weather, the tides, the day's catch, small joys. One entry caught her eye. "Aiko left for the city today. I pray the waves will carry her voice back to us." Another year later, the sea is lonely without her footsteps on the stones. But the waves say she will return. Her hands trembled. She realized then that the sea had been her mother's companion, her confidant, her messenger. And now, perhaps, it was hers as well. Storm. Summer brought a storm unlike any in years. The sea raged, hurling itself against the stones, breaking boats, tearing nets. The village huddled indoors, praying for safety. Aiko stood by the window, heart pounding. She thought of Daichi, out there securing his boat. She rushed into the rain, ignoring the protests of neighbors, running toward the shore. Through sheets of water, she saw him struggling with ropes, waves crashing at his feet. Without hesitation, she joined him, hands burning against wet cords, body trembling against the storm's fury. Together they fought, anchoring the vessel until at last it held firm. When it was done, they collapsed against the stones, drenched and breathless. The storm still howled, but in that moment they laughed, wild and unrestrained, as though children again. Daichi turned to her, eyes fierce yet gentle. "This is why I could never leave. The sea is harsh, but it is also alive. It teaches us what it means to endure." And Aiko realized she had endured the city, but she had not lived. Here, drenched by waves, heart racing, she felt alive in a way she had forgotten. The choice. When the storm passed, the sea returned to calm. The waves lapped gently once more, as though nothing had happened. The village repaired what was broken, life resuming in quiet resilience. For Aiko, a choice loomed. She could return to Tokyo, to her job, to the life she had built. Or she could stay, among stones and waves, where memory and future intertwined. One evening, she walked alone to the shore. The sunset painted the water gold, the waves whispering. She closed her eyes and listened. And she heard it, her mother's voice, faint but clear, carried in the rhythm of the tide. Not words, but presence. A blessing. A welcome. When she opened her eyes, Daichi stood nearby, watching. She smiled, and he understood without words. The sea had given her the answer. Epilogue: the eternal shore. Years passed. Aiko's hair grew silver, Daichi's hands grew slower, but the waves never ceased. Together, they built a life by the shore, simple yet full. They taught children to skip stones, told stories of storms and moons, and each evening they sat, listening to the eternal murmur. The stone shore bore their footsteps, their laughter, their silence. And when one day their time ended, the waves would carry their memory to lapping gently, endlessly, against the stones. For the sea remembers everything. And always, it speaks. Dew on the mossy stones. Prologue: the breath of morning. In the mountain village of Kiyomura, mornings arrived with the quiet precision of a ritual. Before the first rays of sun touched the rooftops, before smoke curled from kitchen hearths, the world lay hushed under a silver sheen. Dew gathered on the stones of the garden paths, on the moss that clung to temple walls, on the wooden bridges that arched over streams. For the villagers, dew was nothing more than a passing adornment, delicate yet ordinary, destined to vanish with the sun. But to Hannah, it was a language. She would rise before her grandfather, slip barefoot into the temple courtyard, and watch the droplets shimmer. The mossy stones glistened like emeralds scattered with diamonds, and the air smelled of wet earth and cedar. Her grandfather, the temple's caretaker, often teased her. "You watch the dew as though it has secrets to tell." And Hannah, still a girl then, would reply, "Maybe it does. It stays only for a moment, but it makes the stones alive." He would nod, never contradicting her, as if to say the world itself might indeed be whispering to anyone who cared enough to listen. Chapter 1: Leaving the village. Years swept Hannah away from Kiyomura. She carried her childhood images of mossy stones tucked somewhere in the quiet corners of her mind, but she rarely revisited them. The city became her universe, streets pulsing with light, voices rising in crowded trains, endless towers climbing higher than the mountains she once knew. She became a teacher, instructing children who had never seen a river unpolluted, who thought the idea of fireflies a fable. She worked long hours, filling her days with timetables and responsibilities until memories of temple bells and cedar groves seemed almost imaginary. Letters from her grandfather arrived occasionally. His handwriting was crooked, his words simple. The camellias are blooming early this year. The carp in the pond have grown fat. I keep the stones clear of weeds. She answered less and less, until the letters stopped. One spring morning, a phone call pierced her routine. Her grandfather had passed quietly in his sleep, the temple left without its keeper. Hannah took a leave from her school and boarded the slow train into the mountains, heart heavy with the weight of forgotten years. As the train curved through valleys and forests, she wondered if the stones of her childhood still glistened with dew. Chapter 2: The Temple Without a Voice. The temple sat as it always had, weathered yet enduring. But without her grandfather's care, it seemed muted. The courtyard was littered with fallen branches, the bell rope frayed, the moss on the stones thick and uneven. Villagers greeted her with polite bows, their eyes carrying unspoken expectation. The temple had been in her family for generations. Someone must tend to it. On her first night, Hannah wandered the courtyard. A lantern sputtered in the wind, casting pale light on the moss. She crouched to touch it, the texture soft, almost alive. In that moment, she felt her grandfather's absence most sharply. He had walked here each dawn, hands clasped behind his back, whispering sutras to the morning air. Now it was silent. And yet when dawn arrived, Hannah woke instinctively. The stones outside were covered with dew. Droplets gathered in the hollows, curved against the moss like fragile beads of glass. She crouched, breath clouding in the cool air, and remembered her childhood words, "It makes the stones alive." Something stirred within her, not yet grief, not yet comfort, but the sense of being spoken to. Chapter 3: The Villager's Request. Days stretched into weeks. Hannah considered returning to the city after the funeral rites were complete, but the villagers came one by one. An elderly woman asked her to ring the bell at dusk, as her grandfather had done. A farmer requested her blessing before planting his rice. Children gathered shyly at the gate, asking if she would tell stories of the temple's fox spirit, the way her grandfather once had. "I'm not a priest," Hannah protested. "I'm only a teacher. Your grandfather kept this place alive," the woman replied. "If you leave, it will fall silent." The words echoed within her. Silence was what she had run from, filling her life with the noise of the city. But here, silence was different. It was a vessel waiting to be filled. One dawn, as dew sparkled on the stones, Hannah whispered aloud, "Grandfather, what should I do?" The answer came not as words, but as a glimmer of light refracting through a single droplet, scattering colors on the moss. She thought of her students in the city, of their narrow worlds, and of the temple children who still believed in fox spirits. Perhaps teaching did not only belong in classrooms. Perhaps the stones themselves could be lessons. Chapter 4 Seasons of Care. Hannah remained. Days grew into seasons, seasons into years. In spring, she scrubbed the stones clean of winter's grime, polished the bell, and planted flowers along the garden edges. Children followed her, carrying buckets of water, laughing when they spilled more on themselves than on the soil. In summer, the forest grew lush. Cicadas hummed in a relentless chorus. She taught the children how to pause and listen for the quieter sounds, the drip of water from eaves, the rustle of pine needles, the faint crackle of moss drying in the sun. In autumn, crimson leaves carpeted the moss, each morning dew transforming them into jeweled fragments. Villagers came with offerings of rice and persimmons. Hannah read sutras at the ceremonies, her voice hesitant at first, but growing steadier with each passing year. In winter, snow softened the stones, but the dew still formed on clear mornings, tiny crystals of light. She would stand alone, hands clasped, watching her breath mingle with the fading mist. Through it all, she felt her grandfather's presence not as a ghost, but as the rhythm of daily care, the patient endurance of stone, moss, and dew. Chapter 5 Visitors. News of the temple spread beyond the village. Hikers climbing the mountain trails stopped to rest in the courtyard. Some asked for water, others for silence. A few lingered, touched by the sight of morning dew on mossy stones, saying they had never seen anything so simple yet profound. One traveler, a painter from the city, stayed for a week, sketching the stones each morning. He confessed to Hannah that he had been on the verge of abandoning his art. "I thought beauty belonged to galleries and fame," he said. "But here it rests on a single drop of dew. It is humbling." A young woman came seeking peace after losing her child. She sat by the stones for hours each dawn, tears mingling with the dew. When she finally left, she bowed deeply to Hannah and whispered, "The moss gave me back my breath." Hannah realized the temple had become more than a family duty. It was a refuge, a reminder, a place where impermanence revealed itself not as loss, but as quiet beauty. Chapter 6 The Return. One autumn evening, a letter arrived from the city school. They asked if she would return to her post, offering a higher position, better pay, and recognition. She read it by lamplight, listening to the river below. That night, she dreamt of the classroom rows of children repeating lessons, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Then she dreamt of the moss, cool beneath her fingertips, dew shimmering like constellations. At dawn, she stepped into the courtyard. The stones glistened. She knelt, watching droplets slide slowly down into the earth. They vanished, absorbed, but their disappearance was not loss, it was continuation. She smiled softly, folded the letter, and placed it on the altar beside her grandfather's photograph. Chapter 7 Passing the Dew. Years later, Hannah grew older. Her hair silvered, her back stooped, but each dawn she still rose to greet the dew. Children she once taught now brought their children to the temple. One morning, she found a little girl crouching by the stones, staring intently. The child looked up at her. "Auntie, why does the dew disappear?" Hannah knelt beside her. "Because it belongs to the morning. But it leaves behind something you cannot see." "What's that?" "The memory of shining." The girl nodded solemnly, as if she understood. Hannah felt her grandfather in that moment, and perhaps all the caretakers before him. The temple would not vanish as long as someone remembered the dew on the mossy stones. Epilogue: the stones remain. Time will continue its endless work. Hannah, too, will one day vanish like morning dew. But the stones will remain, moss growing thicker, absorbing each droplet that graces them. Travelers will come and go. Children will play, elders will pray, lovers will sit in silence. The stones will witness all, dressed each morning in a garment of dew, radiant and fleeting. And perhaps, if one listens carefully enough, the dew will whisper what it whispered to Hannah as a child. "We are fragile, but we shine. We vanish, but we remain. Look closely, and you will remember how to live." The Song of the Wind in the Cedars. Prologue: the breath of the mountain. At the edge of a mountain valley, where mist lingered, like an old friend and rivers carved silver lines through the earth, there stood an ancient grove of cedars. Their trunks were thick with centuries, their roots woven deep into the mountain's body, their branches brushing the sky. When the wind moved through them, the sound was unlike anything else, not merely rustling, but a voice low, resonant, both mournful and comforting. The villagers who lived below the grove said it was the song of the mountain itself, carried by the cedars. Some claimed it was the whisper of the gods, while others believed it was the breath of ancestors. Akira, a boy of 12, believed it was simply the wind. Yet he, too, felt a shiver in his chest whenever that sound reached him. It was as though the cedars spoke a language that he almost but not quite understood. Chapter 1: The Boy Who Listened. Akira's family kept a small home on the outskirts of the village. His father was a carpenter, his mother a weaver. But Akira cared more for the mountain paths than for tools or threads. He often wandered alone, climbing higher than the other children dared, until he reached the silent groves where moss muffled his steps. There, he would sit at the base of the tallest cedar, eyes closed, listening. The wind would come, gentle at first, then swelling, wrapping around him. He imagined the tree breathing. He imagined stories traveling from trunk to trunk, carried through the air like invisible ink. "Why do you always sit there?" his mother once asked, brushing sawdust from his hair. "Because the trees are speaking," he said. She laughed softly, but her eyes softened too. "If they tell you something worth hearing, don't forget to tell me." Chapter 2: The First Tale. One evening, while the village gathered to celebrate the autumn harvest, an old monk arrived from a distant temple. His robe was patched, his staff worn smooth, but his eyes shone with a steady light. He told stories by the fire, and the villagers listened. When he spoke of the wind, Akira leaned forward. "The cedars," the monk said, "hold memory. When the wind passes, it awakens those memories and gives them voice. What you hear is not only the mountain, it is the echo of every prayer, every footstep, every sorrow carried to those trees." The villagers nodded with reverence, though some whispered skepticism. Akira, however, felt his chest tighten. Could it be true? That what he heard in the cedars was not imagination but memory itself? After the festival, the boy followed the monk up the dark path. "Please," Akira begged, "teach me to understand the cedar's song." The monk studied him. "Understanding comes not from wanting, but from waiting. If you are patient, the mountain will speak." And with that, he departed, leaving the boy alone under the stars. Chapter 3: The Silence After the Storm. Winter came with snow heavy enough to break branches. The wind howled fiercely, and the song of the cedars turned into a cry, sharp and sorrowful. One morning after a storm, Akira found that one of the smaller cedars had fallen, its trunk split and roots torn. He touched its bark, cold beneath his palm, and felt a grief he could not name. That night, in his dreams, he heard the fallen cedar whisper, "Do not forget me. I have sung, and my song remains." He awoke with tears on his cheeks. For the first time, he believed the monk's words fully. The cedars did carry memory. And now one memory had ended. Chapter 4: A Father's Hands. Life in the village demanded more than listening. Akira's father began to press him to learn carpentry. "You can't live with your head in the clouds," his father scolded. "Wood is not just for listening. It's for building, for shaping." Reluctantly, Akira learned. He planned the beams, carved the joints, and hammered the nails. His father's hands were steady, his eyes sharp. Yet one evening, as they worked together, his father paused, running his hand over the grain of a cedar board. "Do you hear it?" the man asked suddenly. "Hear what?" "The sound in the wood. This was once a tree that stood on the mountain. The pattern here, it's like a song frozen into the grain." Akira stared. For a moment, he saw his father not as a stern carpenter but as someone who also listened, in his way. Chapter 5: The Festival of Lanterns. Every spring, the village held the Festival of Lanterns to honor their ancestors. Lanterns floated on the river, carrying prayers downstream. That year, Akira crafted a small wooden flute from cedar scrap. As the lanterns drifted, he played. The sound was thin, uncertain, but the villagers turned to listen. The flute's tone blended with the wind through the trees above, creating a harmony that stilled the crowd. His mother touched his shoulder. "It's as if the cedars are playing with you," she whispered. Akira smiled. Perhaps they were. Chapter 6: The Call of the City. As years passed, Akira grew taller, his voice deeper. Word of his carpentry skills spread beyond the village. Merchants from the city came, offering apprenticeship and wealth. "You have talent," his father said. "This place is too small for you." But Akira hesitated. The cedars still sang to him, and the thought of leaving them filled him with unease. One evening, he walked alone into the grove. The wind was strong, the branches swaying. He asked the trees aloud, "Should I go?" The wind answered in a low moan, carrying 1,000 overlapping tones. It was neither yes nor no, but something in between. Akira understood then the cedars would not command his path. They would only remind him to listen. Chapter 7: The Return. Akira did leave, for a time. He lived in the city, where streets were crowded and lanterns burned with unnatural light. He carved furniture for noble houses, his hands quick and skilled. But in the city, nights were filled with the silence of a different kind, heavy, stifling, without the breath of cedars. He dreamt of the wind, of moss and roots, of his father's steady hands. Years later, when his father's health began to fade, Akira returned. He found the village smaller than he remembered, but the cedars taller. Their song greeted him like an old friend. His father, lying weak upon his mat, took his son's hand. "You heard it too, didn't you? All these years. The song of the cedars." "Yes," Akira whispered, tears rising. "And I will not stop listening." Chapter 8: The Teacher. After his father's passing, Akira remained in the village. He built houses, repaired bridges, and carved toys for children. But he also taught. He led the children into the grove, showing them how to sit still, how to listen. At first, they fidgeted, giggled, and threw pebbles. But with time, some of them grew quiet. "Do you hear it?" he would ask. "Just the wind," they answered. "That is enough," he said. Chapter 9: The Pilgrim. One summer, a traveler arrived, an old monk, though not the same as before. His back was bent, his beard long. He asked to see the grove. Together, he and Akira sat beneath the tallest cedar. The wind moved gently, and the tree sighed like an elder breathing in sleep. "Do you hear them?" Akira asked. "I hear," the monk replied. "I hear prayers left unfinished, laughter long gone, tears dried into roots. I hear time itself." Akira bowed his head. "Then it is true." The monk smiled. "Truth is not in the hearing alone. Truth is in how you live after you have heard." Chapter 10: The Song Continues. Years passed. Akira grew older, his hair silvered. Yet he continued to walk the mountain path each morning, to sit among the cedars, to listen. He no longer sought answers. He no longer begged the wind for guidance. Instead, he offered his presence, his stillness, his breath mingling with theirs. One morning, as the sun rose, he felt something shift. The wind carried not only the voices of the past but also his own, woven into the harmony. He realized then that he, too, had become part of the songist's childhood, his father's hands, his mother's smile, his years of work and waiting. All of it lived now in the cedars. And he knew when he was gone, the wind would carry his memory too, singing it to whoever chose to listen. Epilogue for those who listen. The cedars still stand upon the mountain. The wind still moves among them. Travelers pause on the path and hear a sound they cannot explain. Some say it is only wind. Some feel a chill, others a comfort. Few stay long enough to truly listen. But the song continues. It tells of a boy who once sat beneath a tree, who grew into a man, who left and returned, who learned to shape wood and hearts alike. It tells of a village that lived in the shadow of giants. It tells of memory, of loss, of patience, of the way the world speaks in voices easily missed. And if you walk there one dawn, and if you pause long enough, perhaps you too will hear it, the song of the wind in the cedars. Lanterns along the garden path. Prologue. The path in twilight. The garden had been there longer than anyone could remember. Some said it was planted by the ancestors who first settled the valley, others that it had been a sacred ground even before memory. At its heart wound a narrow path of stepping stones, each smoothed by centuries of feet. Moss crept between them, flowers leaned close, and in the evenings, the air thickened with the perfume of plum and chrysanthemum. But most remarkable of all were the lanterns. Each dusk, they appeared along the path, simple stone ones covered in lichen, delicate paper lanterns hung from branches. Bronze ones shaped like lotus buds, and even tiny floating lanterns resting in shallow pools beside the path. None knew who lit them, nor how they burned so steadily. Villagers whispered that the lanterns guided wandering souls, or perhaps they marked the way for dreams themselves to travel. For Aya, a young woman of 20 summers, the lanterns were more than a curiosity. They were her solace. Chapter 1. The Keeper's Granddaughter. Aya lived with her grandfather, Masato, in a small house that bordered the garden. Masato was the garden's keeper, though he never called himself so. His back was bent with age, his hands ridged with veins, yet every morning he swept fallen leaves from the path, trimmed unruly branches, and cleared moss from lantern bases with the patience of someone tending to something far greater than himself. "Why do you care for it so much?" Aya asked once as she held the basket of tools for him. "Because the path remembers us," he answered, tapping one stone with his broom. "And because it is easy for people to lose their way in this world. The lanterns help them return." Aya tilted her head. "Return from where?" Masato only smiled, his eyes hidden beneath white brows. "From wherever they wander." Aya had lost her parents years before, taken by a fever that swept the valley. She had no memory of them now except faint warmth, like sunlight behind clouds. When she sat at the edge of the path at twilight and the lanterns glowed one by one, she sometimes imagined her parents were walking ahead of her, their laughter carried in the lantern light. Chapter 2. The Stranger at Dusk. One evening, as Aya was carrying buckets of water from the well, she saw a figure standing uncertainly at the entrance to the garden path. He was tall, dressed in travel-stained robes, with a pack slung over his shoulder. His eyes were shadowed with fatigue. "Excuse me," he said when he noticed her. "Does this path lead somewhere?" Aya looked at him strangely. Most villagers never questioned the path. They accepted it as one accepts the river or the sky. "It leads where you need to go," she said carefully. The stranger frowned. "That sounds like a riddle." Aya shrugged. "It's the truth." Later, she told her grandfather. Masato only nodded. "The lanterns call those who are lost," he murmured. Aya asked, "Do you think he'll walk the whole way?" Masato's broom paused mid-sweep. "Perhaps. But not everyone is ready to face what waits at the end." Chapter 3: The Festival of Lanterns. Each year in the 9th month, the villagers celebrated the Festival of Lanterns. They would gather at the garden's entrance, bringing their lanterns crafted of paper, wood, or metal, and hang them alongside those that appeared of their own accord. The path would shine like a river of stars, and people would walk it singing old songs, whispering prayers, or simply gazing in wonder. This year, Aya found herself at the festival's edge, her heart restless. The stranger, who had given his name as Ren, was among the crowd. He seemed uneasy, as though he did not belong. Aya approached him. "You should carry a lantern," she said. "Everyone does." Ren shook his head. "I have no lantern to offer." "Then borrow mine," she said, thrusting the paper lantern her grandfather had made for her into his hands. He looked startled. "But then you'll have none." Aya smiled. "I don't need one. I know the way." Together they stepped onto the path. The lanterns glowed brighter, as if welcoming them. Aya felt her chest loosen, though she noticed Ren clutching the lantern tightly, his knuckles white. Chapter 4: The Weight of Shadows. As the path wound deeper into the garden, Ren began to speak. He told her he was from a distant province, that he had once been a scholar in the capital. But the court was rife with corruption, and when he dared to speak against it, his voice was silenced. Friends turned away, his family disowned him, and he fled with nothing. "I don't even know why I came here," he admitted, voice breaking. "I just kept walking. And then I saw these lights." Aya listened quietly. She thought of the times she, too, had felt lost, clutching memories of her parents. The lanterns had been her only companions then. "Maybe you came because the lanterns wanted you to," she said softly. Ren gave her a doubtful glance. But when the path curved and a sudden gust of wind sent dozens of lanterns flickering in unison, his expression softened. For the first time, Aya saw him smile. Chapter 5: The Keeper's Secret. One evening, Aya confronted her grandfather. "The lanterns, do you like them? Is that your task as keeper?" Masato chuckled, shaking his head. "Child, do you think these old hands could light so many in the same breath of dusk? No. The lanterns are lit by what people bring with them: memory, longing, sorrow, hope. They feed the flames." Aya frowned. "Then why do some burn brighter than others?" "Because some people remember more deeply. And some are still searching." She thought of Ren and the way his lantern burned brighter when he spoke of his past. She wondered what it meant for her lantern, which had always seemed steady but modest. Masato added quietly, "When my time comes, I too will leave a lantern along this path. You will follow it, and remember me." Aya's throat tightened. She had never considered her grandfather one day gone. Chapter 6 Lantern of the Lost. Weeks passed. Ren stayed in the village, helping Masato repair old bridges and trim trees. Aya found his presence both comforting and unsettling. She liked his quietness, the way he listened as though every word mattered. Yet she sensed a heaviness in him, something unspoken. One night, she dreamed of the path. She walked alone, but ahead of her a single lantern burned so brightly it blinded her. She woke in sweat, the echo of Ren's voice calling her name lingering in her ears. The next morning, she found him by the river, staring at the water. "I don't know if I can stay," he confessed. "The path, it frightens me. I feel it's waiting for me to finish walking." Aya placed a hand on his sleeve. "Then don't be afraid. I'll walk with you." Chapter 7 Journey's End. The day came when Masato grew too weak to rise. Aya stayed by his side, feeding him tea, adjusting his pillow. Ren sat quietly in the corner, his presence steady. At twilight, when the first lanterns flickered to life, Masato whispered, "It is time." Aya's eyes filled with tears. "No, please." Her grandfather smiled gently. "Do not weep. The path is long, and I go only ahead of you. One day you will follow, and we will meet again where the lanterns end." He closed his eyes, and his breathing faded like wind through leaves. That night, Aya saw a new lantern burning near the garden's entrance. Its light was steady and warm, like her grandfather's hand guiding hers. She fell to her knees, whispering thanks. Ren stood beside her, silent, his face lit by the glow. Chapter 8 Lanterns of the Heart. Seasons turned. Blossoms fell, snow covered the stones, rain came and went. Aya tended the path alone now, though Ren often worked at her side. Together they swept, trimmed, and cleared, keeping the garden alive. One evening, Ren asked, "Aya, if the lanterns are our memories, then what happens if we create new ones? Do new lanterns appear?" She smiled. "Perhaps. Let's try." So they began to craft a lantern together: bamboo ribs, paper walls painted with cedar branches, a wick nestled in oil. When they hung it along the path, it glowed brighter than either expected. Aya felt her chest swell. For the first time, she realized that the path was not only about remembering the past. It was about creating light for the future. Chapter 9 The path continues. The villagers still whispered about the lanterns, still came during the festival, still wondered who tended them. But for Aya, the mystery was no longer frightening. She understood now the lanterns were alive because people needed them to be. Ren remained, and though he sometimes still carried shadows in his eyes, he had begun to laugh again. Aya knew his lantern still waited for him to walk to its end. But for now, he walked beside her. And that was enough. On the night of the next festival, Aya and Ren walked hand in hand along the garden path. Lanterns glowed around them, a river of stars leading into the unseen distance. Aya whispered, "Where does the path truly go?" Ren squeezed her hand. "Wherever we need it to." And together, they walked on, their lantern shining among countless others, each a memory, a hope, a promise, the lights that guide us home. Epilogue: the garden remains. Years later, children would ask about the path, about the lanterns. Aya would smile and tell them to listen, to look carefully, to remember what mattered most. And when dusk fell, she would walk the path, Ren beside her, lanterns flickering gently ahead, leading them always forward, always home. The garden never ended. Neither did the light.